The person everyone overlooks is sometimes the one who quietly changed the future. The crystal chandeliers inside the Grand Harbor Ballroom shimmered like stars reflected across the Atlantic, casting warm golden light over hundreds of elegantly dressed guests who had traveled from across the country to celebrate what many were already calling the wedding of the year. Every chair was perfectly aligned beneath towering white floral arrangements, every place setting polished until it reflected the soft candlelight, and every conversation carried the effortless confidence of people who had spent their lives moving comfortably through rooms just like this one. Luxury sedans lined the entrance outside, while valets greeted each arrival with practiced smiles. A string quartet filled the ballroom with gentle music as photographers moved carefully between tables, capturing laughter, embraces, and sparkling champagne glasses. Then a woman quietly stepped through the front entrance carrying nothing more than a simple envelope and a small bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered that morning on her way to the ceremony. Her name was Vanessa Brooks. She was 39 years old, a public elementary school music teacher from a quiet neighborhood several hours away. Her navy dress was elegant but modest. Her shoes showed the gentle wear of someone who spent long days standing beside children learning their first notes on old instruments, and her warm smile remained unchanged even as conversations subtly faded around her. A few guests glanced toward her before quickly looking away. Others exchanged uncertain expressions without saying a word. One couple quietly picked different seats after noticing where she had paused. A server politely asked whether she was waiting for instructions from the event staff. Vanessa simply smiled and thanked him before explaining she was a guest. The young man apologized immediately, embarrassed by the mistake, but the uncomfortable feeling lingered in the air. Moments later, the wedding coordinator approached with professional courtesy, checked the guest list, then hesitated for just a second before politely suggesting another seat near the back of the ballroom because the front section was reserved for close friends and family. Vanessa nodded without protest. She thanked the coordinator, picked up her bouquet again, and walked toward the final row, passing tables where conversations softened as she walked by. She did not complain. She did not defend herself. She simply offered a gentle smile to an elderly woman struggling to adjust her chair and quietly helped her before continuing to her own seat. From where she sat, the breathtaking floral arch overlooking the ocean looked almost impossibly distant. Guests continued arriving, laughter gradually filling every corner of the ballroom. Yet one question echoed repeatedly behind the scenes. The groom had not taken his place. His best man checked his watch. His father looked toward the private suite. The wedding planner hurried through the hallway with growing concern before returning once again to the bridal party. Every answer led to the same response. Ethan Carter had calmly refused to begin the ceremony. He stood perfectly dressed in his black tuxedo, looking neither anxious nor uncertain. He asked only one quiet question, the very same question he had repeated since sunrise. "Has Ms. Brooks arrived yet?" Nobody seemed to know the answer, even though she was already sitting alone in the last row, almost invisible to the very people who believed they knew exactly who belonged at this wedding. Vanessa Brooks had never expected to attend a wedding where almost every guest arrived in a luxury car worth more than the small house she had spent 15 years paying off, yet she felt no resentment as she quietly folded her hands around the bouquet resting in her lap. She had learned long ago that comparing lives only distracted people from appreciating their own blessings. Every weekday began the same way for her. She woke before sunrise in her modest home outside Annapolis, brewed a single cup of coffee, watered the flowers growing beside her front porch, and drove nearly 40 miles to Jefferson Elementary School, where children raced through the hallways carrying oversized backpacks and endless questions. Room 104 was never the fanciest classroom in the building. Some instruments had chipped paint. Several music stands had been repaired more than once with careful hands and determination. The upright piano had missing scratches across its wooden surface from decades of eager young musicians. None of those imperfections mattered to Vanessa because she believed children never remembered whether a classroom was expensive. They remembered how someone made them feel inside it. Every morning, she welcomed each student by name before the first lesson even began. She celebrated tiny victories that many adults overlooked, whether it was a child finally finding the courage to sing in front of classmates or another student learning to keep steady rhythm for the first time. Parents often thanked her for teaching music, but many later admitted she had really taught confidence, patience, and kindness. Years passed exactly that way. One graduating class followed another. Hundreds of children moved on to middle school, high school, college, careers, and families of their own. Vanessa rarely heard from them again, and she never expected to. She believed the purpose of teaching was not to be remembered. It was to prepare someone else for a future they would eventually create without you. When the elegant invitation had arrived several weeks earlier, she almost assumed it had been delivered to the wrong address. The thick cream envelope carried no explanation beyond a handwritten note asking her to attend because her presence meant more than she could imagine. There was no long letter describing why. There was no mention of gifts. There was only sincere gratitude expressed in careful handwriting that brought a quiet smile to her face without revealing very much at all. Even then, she had hesitated before accepting. Weddings belonged to families and lifelong friends, not to a public school teacher who had simply spent her career encouraging children to believe in themselves. Sitting quietly in the final row now, she watched guests greeting one another with polished confidence while she remained almost invisible among them. She noticed a nervous flower girl struggling to keep tiny white blossoms from falling out of her basket and gently helped rearrange them without drawing attention to herself. She offered a reassuring smile to a young ring bearer whose hands shook from excitement. Neither child cared what kind of dress she wore or where she had been seated. They simply smiled back. Across the ballroom, the wedding coordinator hurried past once again with growing concern, while whispers spread from table to table that the ceremony was somehow delayed. Vanessa glanced toward the grand entrance, unaware that the man everyone was waiting for had not forgotten a single lesson she had ever taught him, even after all those years. Behind the closed doors of a private preparation suite overlooking the ocean, Ethan Carter stood quietly in front of a tall window while the afternoon sunlight reflected across the water below. His tuxedo fit perfectly, every detail carefully prepared months in advance, yet his attention remained fixed on neither the ceremony nor the celebration waiting beyond the hallway. His best man had already reminded him 3 times that every guest was seated. His father had assured him that the officiant was ready. The wedding coordinator had politely explained that everything was on schedule except for one unexpected delay. Ethan simply smiled with calm certainty before asking the same question once again. "Has Ms. Brooks arrived?" The answer was always uncertain. Some believed she had declined the invitation. Others admitted they had never heard the name before. Ethan thanked each person for trying, but refused to walk toward the ceremony until someone found her. His patience confused nearly everyone around him because the guest list included respected judges, successful business owners, decorated military veterans, university professors, physicians, and lifelong family friends. Many of them had traveled hundreds or even thousands of miles to celebrate this day. Yet the one guest Ethan cared about most remained unnoticed by almost everyone in the ballroom. His fiancée, Emily, understood completely. Earlier that morning, she had gently taken his hand and reminded him that the wedding would only feel complete if the woman who had changed his life was present to witness it. Emily had never met Vanessa until the invitation list was finalized, but she had listened countless evenings as Ethan shared stories from his childhood. After losing his mother at a young age, he had become painfully quiet. Teachers worried about his grades, neighbors noticed he rarely smiled, and even relatives struggled to help him reconnect with the world around him. Then he met a music teacher who never tried to erase his grief. Instead, she patiently taught him that sorrow and hope could exist together. She encouraged him to play simple melodies whenever words felt impossible. She praised effort instead of perfection. She celebrated every small victory without asking for recognition. Those lessons slowly rebuilt a confidence that reached far beyond music. Years later, when Ethan earned scholarships, graduated from college, built a successful business, and eventually found the woman he wanted to marry, he often reflected that none of those milestones would have existed without someone who quietly believed in a frightened child before anyone else could see his potential. Outside the preparation suite, conversations among guests became increasingly curious as the ceremony remained delayed. Some speculated that a technical problem had interrupted the schedule. Others wondered whether traffic had delayed an important family member. No one imagined that the entire celebration had paused because a public school music teacher was sitting unnoticed in the final row. Meanwhile, Vanessa remained completely unaware of the growing search taking place around her. She smiled warmly as the flower girl proudly showed her the neatly arranged basket of blossoms, complimented the nervous ring bearer for standing so confidently in his tiny suit, and accepted a glass of water from a server with sincere gratitude. She never once considered that every passing minute brought the entire ballroom closer to discovering who she truly was in the eyes of the groom, while Ethan stood at the doorway, calm and unwavering, knowing that no celebration of his future could begin until the person who had helped save his childhood was finally welcomed with the honor she had never asked to receive. The quiet delay gradually transformed elegant anticipation into restless curiosity as guests began checking their watches, whispering politely across beautifully decorated tables, and exchanging uncertain smiles that tried to disguise growing confusion. The string quartet continued playing soft classical music while the Atlantic breeze drifted through the open glass doors, carrying the scent of fresh ocean air into the ballroom. Yet the groom still had not appeared beneath the floral arch, where everyone expected him to be standing by now. The wedding coordinator moved quickly from one conversation to another, speaking into a discreet headset while reviewing the guest list again with increasing urgency. She paused beside the final row where Vanessa Brooks remained seated with perfect composure, gently holding the bouquet of wildflowers in her lap as she admired the peaceful view of the ocean beyond the ceremony space. Before the coordinator could speak, an elderly guest standing nearby accidentally dropped her small evening purse onto the polished floor, scattering reading glasses, tissues, and family photographs in every direction. Without hesitation, Vanessa quietly knelt beside her, carefully gathering each item one by one while reassuring the embarrassed woman that everything was perfectly fine. The elderly guest smiled with sincere appreciation and thanked her warmly. Vanessa simply wished her a beautiful afternoon before returning every item exactly as it had been. A few nearby guests noticed the quiet act of kindness, yet most quickly returned to their own conversations. Moments later, a young boy wearing a tiny suit became overwhelmed by nervousness as he struggled to remember where he was supposed to stand during the ceremony. His anxious eyes searched the crowded ballroom until Vanessa noticed him from across the aisle. She walked over slowly, crouched beside him so they could speak at eye level, and reminded him to take one slow breath at a time. She told him that everyone in the room wanted him to succeed, and that all he needed to do was keep walking toward the smiling faces waiting for him. The boy relaxed almost immediately, smiled with new confidence, and thanked her before returning to his place. Several parents observed the interaction with quiet admiration, although none recognized the years of experience behind her calm encouragement. Meanwhile, the wedding coordinator finally approached Vanessa once again, this time looking more carefully at the invitation resting beside her bouquet. She studied the elegant handwriting, then looked back at the guest list in her hands before a subtle expression of uncertainty crossed her face. The name matched exactly. She excused herself politely and hurried away without offering an explanation. Across the ballroom, another assistant rushed toward the private preparation suite and quietly informed Ethan Carter that a guest named Vanessa Brooks had indeed checked in earlier that afternoon. Ethan immediately looked up with visible relief, but his expression changed when the assistant admitted that nobody could tell him where she had been seated. Without a moment of hesitation, Ethan straightened his jacket, thanked everyone waiting with him, and calmly walked toward the ballroom entrance. At the very same moment, the coordinator hurried back through the crowded aisle, her eyes searching every row until they finally rested on Vanessa sitting peacefully in the last seat. Still completely unaware that the entire celebration had paused because the groom refused to begin one of the most important moments of his life until the woman who had quietly shaped his future received the respect she had deserved all along. The wedding coordinator slowed her pace as she approached the final row, her confident professional demeanor replaced by genuine uncertainty. For the first time since the guests had begun arriving that afternoon, she looked beyond the seating chart and carefully studied the woman sitting quietly beside the aisle. Vanessa Brooks greeted her with the same warm smile she had offered everyone else throughout the day, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. The coordinator spoke softly, asking if she was indeed Ms. Brooks. Vanessa nodded politely and reached for her invitation, believing perhaps there had been another seating adjustment. Instead, the coordinator hesitated before saying something she had never expected to say at any wedding she had ever managed. She explained that the groom had been asking for her repeatedly and that the ceremony had not begun because he wanted to know where she was. Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. She smiled politely and assumed there must be some misunderstanding because she had not seen Ethan in nearly 20 years. She quietly replied that he was surely busy with his wedding and that she did not wish to interrupt such an important day. The coordinator shook her head with growing emotion and admitted that nothing would move forward until he found her. Around them, nearby conversations slowly faded as curious guests noticed the unexpected exchange. Several people glanced toward the final row, trying to understand why the wedding planner appeared so concerned about a guest almost no one had noticed before. At that same moment, the large ballroom doors opened with quiet elegance. Every head instinctively turned toward the entrance, expecting the ceremony finally to begin. Instead of walking toward the floral arch where the officiant waited, Ethan Carter stepped into the room alone and paused for a brief moment, calmly scanning every row of guests. His expression carried neither frustration nor anxiety. It carried relief mixed with quiet determination. The room became remarkably still. Even the musicians gently lowered their instruments as they realized something unexpected was unfolding. Ethan's eyes moved across the front rows filled with family members, respected colleagues, lifelong friends, and distinguished guests before continuing toward the back of the ballroom. Then he saw her. A warm smile immediately crossed his face, the kind of smile that came from recognizing someone who had once changed the direction of an entire life. Without saying a single word to anyone else, he walked past every reserved seat, every honored guest, every carefully arranged floral display, and every person who had expected to be at the center of his attention. Guests instinctively stepped aside as he continued toward the final row where Vanessa slowly stood, still uncertain why he was approaching her. When he finally reached her, he stopped only a few feet away, his eyes filled with sincere gratitude that could not be hidden. The silence throughout the ballroom became almost unforgettable. Those who had quietly avoided sitting beside Vanessa earlier now watched in complete disbelief. The coordinator lowered her head, suddenly remembering every assumption she had made only an hour before. Ethan smiled gently and spoke with unmistakable warmth. "Ms. Brooks, I have been looking everywhere for you. I could not begin one of the happiest days of my life until I knew you were here." Vanessa's eyes widened with quiet emotion as she realized this invitation had never been a polite gesture sent out of obligation. It had been a heartfelt promise from a former student who had carried her kindness with him every single day since childhood. And now an entire ballroom stood silently witnessing the extraordinary value of a woman almost everyone had overlooked only moments before. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The only sounds inside the grand ballroom were the distant waves rolling against the shoreline beyond the glass windows and the gentle movement of the ocean breeze through the white flowers decorating the ceremony aisle. Ethan remained standing before Vanessa with the same grateful smile that had first appeared the moment he recognized her across the room. She looked at him with quiet disbelief, searching his face for the little boy she had once encouraged every afternoon after school. Time had changed nearly everything about him, yet the kindness in his eyes felt instantly familiar. Before anyone could say another word, Ethan reached forward and wrapped his arms around his former teacher in a warm embrace filled with genuine appreciation rather than ceremony. A quiet gasp moved through the audience as hundreds of guests watched one of the most successful men in the room publicly honor the woman almost everyone else had overlooked only minutes earlier. When they stepped back, Ethan spoke clearly enough for every guest to hear without raising his voice. He explained that many people believed success was built by ambition alone, but his own life had begun changing because one teacher refused to let a frightened child believe that his future had ended with his mother's passing. He told them that while others saw an unusually quiet student, Vanessa had seen possibility. She never treated him like someone who needed pity. Instead, she gave him responsibility, encouragement, and confidence one small lesson at a time. She taught him that progress did not come from being the loudest person in a room. It came from showing up every day with kindness and determination even when nobody seemed to notice. Ethan smiled as he admitted that every major achievement people admired today could be traced back to those afternoons inside a modest elementary school music classroom where someone believed in him before he believed in himself. Across the ballroom, Emily gently wiped away tears before stepping forward to join them. She embraced Vanessa warmly and thanked her for giving the man she loved the courage to become exactly who he was today. Several members of both families quietly reached for tissues while even the musicians lowered their eyes for a moment, deeply moved by the unexpected honesty unfolding before them. The wedding coordinator slowly approached with visible humility. Looking directly at Vanessa, she sincerely apologized for assuming she belonged anywhere other than the place of honor she had earned long before entering the ballroom. The photographer, remembering his own silent assumptions earlier that afternoon, quietly lowered his camera for a moment before offering his own apology as well. Around the room, guests who had avoided sitting beside Vanessa or questioned her presence exchanged embarrassed glances as they recognized how quickly appearances had shaped their judgment. Vanessa listened to every apology with the same calm grace she had carried throughout the day. She smiled gently and told them that kindness always had room for another beginning. She held no bitterness, only gratitude that everyone now had the opportunity to truly see one another. Her quiet words settled over the ballroom more powerfully than any speech prepared for the ceremony. Sunlight continued to shimmer across the Atlantic beyond the windows, filling the room with a soft golden glow as Ethan extended his arm and respectfully asked the woman who had shaped his childhood if she would do him the greatest honor of walking beside him to the front of the ceremony. With humble surprise and quiet dignity, Vanessa accepted, and together they began walking slowly down the aisle while every guest rose to their feet, not because tradition required it, but because genuine respect had finally found its rightful place. As Vanessa and Ethan slowly walked together toward the front of the ballroom, the atmosphere felt entirely different from the one that had greeted her only a short time earlier. The same guests who had quietly looked past her now watched with sincere admiration, many realizing that the most remarkable person in the room had never needed wealth, influence, or recognition to leave an extraordinary mark on the world. Every step down the flower-lined aisle seemed to erase another layer of misunderstanding until what remained was simple human gratitude. Emily welcomed them with a smile that reflected both joy and respect before gently taking Vanessa's hands into her own. She thanked her not only for helping shape Ethan into the man standing beside her, but also for reminding everyone present that the strongest foundations are often built by people whose names rarely appear in headlines or history books. Vanessa responded with quiet humility, explaining that every teacher hopes to see students discover their own strength, and that watching them build meaningful lives is already the greatest reward anyone in her profession could receive. Ethan smiled and reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo, removing a carefully folded piece of yellowed sheet music that had clearly been protected for many years. The edges had softened with age, and faint pencil markings covered the page. He unfolded it carefully before showing it to the guests. He explained that this was the very first piece of music Vanessa had asked him to practice after his mother's passing. On the top corner, written in her familiar handwriting, was a simple sentence that had stayed with him through every challenge he had ever faced. It read, "Do not measure yourself by today. Measure yourself by who you are becoming." Ethan admitted that he had carried those words through college examinations, difficult business decisions, moments of failure, and even the day he asked Emily to marry him. Whenever fear tempted him to give up, he remembered the teacher who believed that growth happened one faithful step at a time. A respectful silence settled over the ballroom as many guests quietly reflected on the people who had shaped their own lives without ever asking for recognition. Ethan then turned toward the officiant and made one final request before the ceremony officially began. He asked if Vanessa would sit in the front row beside his family for the remainder of the wedding because, in his heart, she had earned that place many years ago. His parents immediately stood and warmly welcomed her, insisting that the empty seat beside them had been waiting for her all along. The wedding coordinator personally escorted Vanessa to the front, no longer following a seating chart, but following genuine respect. As she took her place, the The musicians gently began playing again, this time with a warmth that seemed to fill every corner of the ballroom. The ceremony finally began, yet it no longer felt like only the celebration of two people beginning a marriage. It had quietly become a celebration of gratitude, humility, forgiveness, and the lasting influence of everyday kindness. Looking around the room, Vanessa noticed smiles where uncertainty had once existed and open hearts where silent assumptions had quietly stood. She did not feel elevated above anyone else. She simply felt thankful that one former student had chosen to honor the truth publicly, proving that the greatest legacy a person can leave is not measured by status or wealth, but by the lives they quietly help transform, one act of compassion at a time. When the ceremony came to its joyful conclusion and the newly married couple walked back down the aisle together, the atmosphere inside the ballroom no longer carried even a trace of the quiet distance that had greeted Vanessa earlier that afternoon. The celebration continued beneath glowing string lights as guests gathered on the oceanfront terrace, where laughter blended gently with the sound of waves meeting the shoreline. Conversations that had once centered on careers, investments, and social accomplishments slowly shifted towards stories about teachers, mentors, grandparents, neighbors, and ordinary people whose quiet encouragement had changed lives in ways that success alone never could. Vanessa stood near the edge of the terrace, watching the sunlight fade into soft shades of orange and blue across the Atlantic, content simply to witness the happiness surrounding Ethan and Emily. She had never expected to become the center of anyone's attention, and she certainly did not seek it now. One by one, however, people approached her with sincere humility. The wedding coordinator thanked her for accepting an apology that had come from an honest recognition of her own assumptions. She admitted that years of managing prestigious events had taught her to recognize status almost instantly, but that afternoon had reminded her how easily appearances could hide remarkable character. Vanessa smiled warmly and assured her that every person has moments they wish they had handled differently, but true growth begins when someone has the courage to learn instead of defend their mistakes. Soon afterward, the photographer quietly joined them. He confessed that when Vanessa first arrived, he had overlooked her completely while focusing on guests he assumed would matter most in the wedding album. Now he asked if she would allow him to take one portrait, not because she had become famous inside the ballroom, but because he wanted to remember the person whose quiet presence had transformed the entire day. Vanessa laughed softly and agreed, standing naturally beside the ocean as the evening light reflected gently across the water. The photograph captured no grand pose, only a peaceful smile filled with humility and grace. Throughout the reception, more guests approached with similar conversations. Some shared memories of teachers they wished they had thanked years earlier. Others admitted they had judged people too quickly in their own lives. Emily's parents warmly invited Vanessa to visit again, explaining that they hoped future family celebrations would always include the woman who had helped shape the man their daughter loved. Ethan's father quietly told Vanessa that he finally understood why his son had insisted the ceremony could not begin without her. He shook her hand with genuine respect before simply saying, "Thank you for giving my son hope when our family struggled to find it." Those simple words touched Vanessa more deeply than any applause ever could. As music filled the evening air and families gathered for photographs beneath the glowing lights, Ethan found Vanessa once more before she quietly prepared to leave. He handed her a small envelope and asked her not to open it until she reached home. She accepted it with gentle curiosity, but reminded him that the greatest gift he could ever offer was already standing beside him, wearing a wedding dress and smiling with complete happiness. Ethan laughed and thanked her once again for teaching him that kindness was never measured by recognition, only by the lives it quietly changed. Looking around at the joyful celebration, Vanessa realized that forgiveness had accomplished something resentment never could. It had allowed an entire room of strangers to leave not with embarrassment over what had happened earlier that day, but with a deeper understanding of how easily compassion can restore what assumptions so often divide. The drive home was peaceful. The highway stretched beneath a sky filled with fading shades of blue and gold as Vanessa Brooks kept one hand gently resting on the steering wheel and the other on the small envelope Ethan had placed in her care before she left the reception. She did not rush to open it. Instead, she smiled quietly, replaying the unexpected moments of the day, not because she had finally received recognition, but because she had witnessed hearts change in ways that could not be measured by applause or elegant speeches. By the time she reached her modest home, the stars had begun filling the night sky. She placed the bouquet of wildflowers in a simple glass vase on her kitchen table before finally opening the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Ethan along with a document establishing a permanent music scholarship in honor of Vanessa Brooks for students in public elementary schools who demonstrated kindness, perseverance, and compassion toward others. The scholarship would provide instruments, private lessons, and educational opportunities for children whose families could not easily afford them. At the bottom of the letter, Ethan had written only one sentence. "Everything I become will always carry a piece of what you first believed I could be." Vanessa slowly folded the letter, closed her eyes for a moment, and whispered a quiet thank you before placing it beside a worn family photograph and an old music book that had followed her through nearly 2 decades of teaching. Early Monday morning, her routine returned exactly as it always had. Before sunrise, she watered the flowers beside her porch, prepared a cup of coffee, and drove the familiar 40 miles to Jefferson Elementary School. Nothing about the building had changed. The hallway floors still echoed with excited footsteps. Children's voices still filled the air before the first bell. The old piano still waited inside room 104. As Vanessa unlocked the classroom door, she stopped in surprise. Sitting beside the piano was a brand-new upright instrument with a polished walnut finish, accompanied by several unopened boxes containing violins, music stands, beginner keyboards, and classroom supplies. Resting on top was a small card with no signature. It simply read, "For every child whose future will begin here." Vanessa smiled because she already knew who had sent it. A few minutes later, students began arriving exactly as they always did, filling the classroom with cheerful greetings, backpacks, and endless curiosity. One little girl immediately noticed the beautiful piano and asked if they would finally be able to learn songs that sounded like the ones she heard at church every Sunday. Vanessa nodded warmly and invited the children to gather around the instrument. Before placing her hands on the keys, she looked around the room filled with hopeful young faces and quietly realized that the greatest stories are rarely about the people standing beneath crystal chandeliers or walking across grand stages. They are about ordinary people who choose kindness long before anyone is watching, trusting that compassion will eventually reach places they may never personally see. Somewhere along the Atlantic coast, Ethan and Emily were beginning the first morning of their new life together, carrying forward the lesson that had shaped every meaningful step of his journey. Inside a modest classroom many miles away, another generation waited to discover the same truth. As warm morning sunlight poured gently through the classroom windows, the first notes of music rose into the air, and the room filled with quiet hope, proving once again that genuine greatness is never defined by the attention a person receives, but by the lives forever changed because they chose to care when it mattered most.